Imagine catching your partner red-handed with their so-called real love, and instead of breaking down, you take control of the narrative in the most unforgettable way. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's one of revenge, empowerment, and reclaiming dignity. Let's dive into the explosive events of that fateful Friday. Ever caught your partner cheating, and instead of breaking down, you flipped the script and took control? Watch as one woman turns a moment of betrayal into an unforgettable act of revenge, filled with drama, suspense, and the ultimate fight for dignity. You won't believe what happens next. Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. It was a gloomy Friday, a day I'll never forget. Within minutes, I would see if my life had spiraled out of control. But I wasn't the type to sulk and feel sorry for myself. I remembered my old sergeant's wisdom. Action is the best offense. My only option was to fight for my dignity, even if everything else fell apart. I had received some crucial information the day before, giving me enough time to prepare. That's why I was sitting in a friend's black Peugeot 307, discreetly parked in the corner of a motel parking lot. I was told my husband would be there after lunch, and I anxiously waited for his silver Toyota Yaris to arrive. Sure enough, he showed up, closely followed by her, the woman he called his real partner, driving her flashy BMW. She parked beside his car, said a few words, and walked into the registration office. I stepped out of the car, walked to my husband's Toyota, opened the unlocked passenger door and sat inside. My startled husband shouted, "Lisa, what the hell are you doing here?" I handed him a brown envelope. "Not much, just giving these divorce papers to my cheating husband. Enjoy your time with your real partner, you two deserve each other." He stammered, "No, Lisa, you're wrong. It's not what it looks like. Let me explain." "Explain?" I retorted. "Save it for the court and don't bother coming home tonight." At that moment, his real partner returned holding a room key. Spotting me, she demanded, "Who is this, and what's going on?" "I'm his wife," I said, glaring at her. "Soon-to-be ex-wife, actually. But don't let me ruin your romantic evening." Enraged, she shouted, "You can't just waltz in here and ruin our plans." That's when I acted. I pulled out a small plastic bottle filled with shampoo and water and sprayed it into her face. She screamed, blinded and stumbling. Then I reached for my next tool, a dart with barbed tips I'd made in my workshop. Before she could recover, I jabbed it into her leg. She howled in pain. Meanwhile, my husband sat frozen in shock. I turned to him. "You're next if you don't get out of my sight." He scrambled out of the car, apologizing profusely. I stormed back to my friend's car and left the parking lot. That Friday ended with a lot of drama, but one thing was certain. There wouldn't be any romantic rendezvous for those two that day. Would you like further adjustments or additions? "Foro," you said. Continue, ChatGPT said. ChatGPT, certainly. Here's the continuation of the story with the requested changes to switch male characters to female and vice versa. It had been a tough few weeks, but something remarkable began to unfold in the aftermath of everything. My spouse, who I'll now call Richard instead of Rebecca, had become a completely different person. Gone was the nagging, the constant comparisons to others, and the cold behavior that had defined the last few years of our marriage. Richard had seemingly turned over a new leaf. Instead of finding faults, he praised my efforts. Instead of avoiding me, he sought my company. Our shared responsibilities around the house suddenly became opportunities for teamwork, and even our conversations became lighter and full of laughter. It was as if the person I'd fallen in love with all those years ago had returned. The change in Richard didn't stop there. Our two children, Emile and Estelle, were also visibly happier. They sensed the shift in the atmosphere, and their smiles became a daily reward for all the effort I'd put into standing my ground. But as much as I appreciated this new Richard, I couldn't forget what had brought us to this point. The betrayal, or at least the intention of it, had left a scar that wouldn't heal overnight. While I saw Richard trying, I still had doubts about whether the person I was now living with had genuinely changed, or if this was just an act to save face. One thing was for certain, though. Our arrangement was working for now. We had agreed to remain civil for the sake of the kids, and I had made my position clear about our 6-month cooling-off period before the divorce would be finalized. As the weeks went by, Richard continued to show signs of remorse and commitment. He took on more responsibilities around the house, made effort to reconnect with me, and even apologize for the years of hurtful behavior. At first I was skeptical, but slowly I began to see glimpses of sincerity in his actions. Despite these changes, I couldn't shake the memory of the betrayal that had set all of this into motion. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. And while I could acknowledge Richard's efforts, I knew that time would ultimately determine the future of our relationship. By the end of the 6 months, we sat down to discuss our next steps. Richard, now fully aware of the damage caused by his actions, admitted his mistakes and asked for a chance to rebuild what we had lost. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly being heard. While I didn't give a definitive answer that day, I agreed to take things one step at a time. Whether or not we'd ever fully repair the trust between us, only time would tell. But for now, we had made peace with the past and were focused on creating a better future for ourselves and our children. As the days turned into weeks, Richard's transformation continued. He went out of his way to make amends, not just with me, but also with our children. He became more present in their lives, attending Emil's soccer games and helping Estelle with her art projects. Their bond grew stronger, and the warmth in our home returned, albeit tentatively. Despite his efforts, I remained cautious. Forgiveness is a journey, not a single moment, and I wasn't ready to lower my guard just yet. My friends and family were divided on the issue. Some urged me to give Richard another chance, citing his visible remorse and commitment to change. Others reminded me of the pain he had caused and warned me not to let my guard down too soon. I decided to take my time and focus on my own healing. I started going to therapy, which helped me process my emotions and rebuild my self-esteem. It was liberating to have a space where I could openly talk about my fears, doubts, and hopes without judgment. Richard, to his credit, respected my need for space. He didn't push me for answers or try to rush the process. Instead, he continued to show his sincerity through his actions. He even suggested we try couples counseling to work through the lingering issues in our relationship. During one of our sessions, Richard opened up about the reasons behind his behavior. He admitted that he had felt neglected and unappreciated, but he also acknowledged that his feelings didn't justify his actions. Hearing him take responsibility for his mistakes was a turning point for me. It didn't erase the hurt, but it was a step toward rebuilding trust. As the months passed, I noticed a change within myself as well. The anger and resentment that had once consumed me began to fade. I wasn't sure if it was forgiveness or simply the passage of time, but I started to see Richard in a new light. He wasn't perfect, far from it, but he was trying, and that meant something. One evening, as we sat together after the kids had gone to bed, Richard looked at me and said, "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back, but I'm here now, and I'm willing to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the partner you deserve. Will you give me that chance?" His words caught me off guard. For the first time in a long time, I saw vulnerability in his eyes. He wasn't just asking for forgiveness, he was asking for the opportunity to rebuild what we had lost. I didn't have an answer for him that night. Instead, I told him the truth. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm willing to keep trying, one day at a time. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a new beginning. We had a long road ahead of us, filled with challenges and uncertainties. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The following months were a whirlwind of discovery, growth, and tentative steps forward. Richard and I continued therapy, not just for our relationship but also as individuals. It became apparent that our issues ran deeper than the affair. They were rooted in years of unspoken frustrations and unmet needs. Therapy gave us tools to communicate better, to listen without judgment, and to rebuild trust brick by fragile brick. One of the most profound exercises came during a session where our counselor asked us to write letters to each other. Honest, unfiltered letters about our pain, our hopes, and what we wanted for the future. I spent hours crafting mine, pouring out years of bottled-up emotions. When I finally read it aloud, I could see the guilt and regret etched on Richard's face. His letter, in turn, revealed things I hadn't known, about his insecurities, his fear of failure as a husband and father, and his deep regret for jeopardizing our family. It was a raw and painful exchange, but it also brought a sense of understanding. For the first time, we weren't just seeing each other's flaws, we were seeing each other's, humanity. At home, the changes continued. Richard took on more responsibilities, from cooking meals to helping with homework. He planned family outings, something he'd rarely done before, and began prioritizing quality time with me. I found myself softening, despite my resolve to stay guarded. The man I had fallen in love with seemed to be re-emerging, but this time he was more present, more intentional. Still, doubts lingered. There were moments when I'd catch myself overthinking, wondering if I was making a mistake by letting him back into my life. I questioned whether I was holding on to the past out of fear, or genuinely giving us a chance to heal. My therapist reminded me that these feelings were normal, and that healing wasn't linear. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Richard handed me a small box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with the word "Hope" engraved on it. "I know I can't erase what I've done," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "But I want this to be a reminder of what we're building, a future filled with hope. Not perfect, but better." Tears welled up in my eyes as I slid the bracelet onto my wrist. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't a grand gesture. It was a promise, one I hoped he would keep. Our journey wasn't without setbacks. There were arguments, moments of mistrust, and times when I wondered if the pain would ever fully subside. But each time we found our way back to the commitment we'd made, to try, to keep moving forward, even when it felt impossible. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the day I discovered the affair, Richard surprised me with a heartfelt dinner at home. The kids were with my sister, and the house was filled with candles and soft music. He presented me with another letter, one that spoke of gratitude, love, and a renewed vow to cherish the life we were rebuilding. As I read his words, I realized something profound. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, nor did it mean erasing the pain. It meant choosing to focus on the present and the future rather than being shackled by the past. That night, as we sat together under the stars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. We weren't perfect, and we never would be. But we were trying, and that was enough. Our story wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. And sometimes, real is better.